Did you find home hemodialysis gave you more control or independence compared to your mom's in-center experience?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. You like in unit when, let's say, for example, we had a wedding that we were going to on the weekend and her treatment was on Saturdays, and she was on the night shift. So we would try to make it arrangements like months in advance, say, could we get mom's schedule changed? We need her off Saturday night. It would take about a month to try to rejig the schedules because you're sharing that machine with other patients. Whereas when I had it at home, it's mine. So if I had a wedding on Saturday night, I would say, you know what, I will dialyze Friday, I will skip Saturday night, and I start up again Sunday. It was like an instantaneous switch that I could do on my own. I don't want to say abused, but if I drank more than I should have, and I'm talking not alcohol, just fluids, or if I had watermelon, like foods that are rich in water based, I could tell when I was starting to have trouble breathing. I was starting to carry too much fluids. I'd say, you know what, I'm going to dialyze. So I would go on, put myself in just for a 4 hour treatment, and then I would pick up my regular cycle at night. So that kind of stuff gave me a better lease on the whole dialysis treatment because that was within my control.
And why do you think that, like, aside from like language barriers, why would people like choose in unit as opposed to a flexible hemodialysis experience?
So the biggest thing that I noticed is you have to be of a, and it's actually not, language barrier is one that you've got to be able to read a document, but it's almost like you have to be able to troubleshoot. So my mom's generation, with the level of education that they had, they would never, like, let me put it to you this way. There may be times when you're asleep and then something wakes you up at night. And just before you realize, you're trying to basically shake the cobwebs out of your head because you were fast asleep. And you're doing the same thing on dialysis. So you've got to be able to, when the alarm goes off on the machine, within a reasonable amount of time of seconds, be able to say, okay, sit up. I got to start diagnosing, why is this thing alarming? Is it a clot that's in the line? Because if it's a blood clot, the last thing you want is for that blood clot to get into your system, which now you've got a different issue. Should I be calling 911? Do I need to reinfuse the blood back into my, like, these are all the things that you get trained for. And the training is quite expensive. And then, you got to feel comfortable running through these various diagnostic routines. So I think that's probably the largest block for people to say, let me go into, home dialysis. Now, the other one is, and I know there's some new units that are available for seniors residents or condominiums. Like in my case, because I'm in a house, they sent the tradespeople, they had to rejig the plumbing and the electrical to accommodate the machine. In a house, you can do that. In a condo where your walls, if your pipes are in concrete, you can't just move stuff around. So there's physical limitations. If somebody's in a condo, you may not be able to do it. On the traditional machines, some newer, smaller machines, I think you are able to do it. But then the question comes into, does the patient have the wherewithal to be able to self-diagnose problems, um, and keep their cool? Like, I mean, I did that for a living with electronics and computers, so I was used to the 2 o'clock in the morning, your phone goes off, there's a problem at a specific customer account, then you've got to go and you got to work through the problem. So that wasn't foreign to me, but that will be I think the biggest stumbling block for patients.
So you've spoken about carrying guilt for not recognizing your mom's symptoms as valid. So how do you process or work through that right now?
Um, well, at times it's still there. And now it's been almost, this October will be 2 years that I've had my transplant. So there is a level of guilt that did I not give her the right amount of attention. I know that there was always some level of, that she complained about various ailments. I look at it from the perspective of, I know I did the best that I could at the time, knowing what I knew at the time. So, yeah, I can sit here and beat myself up. It's not going to really change anything. Um, so instead, what I've done is I started volunteering at Humber in the nephrology PFAC. And then from that, I also moved on to the corporate PFAC at Humber while mom was still doing her dialysis. I mean, she passed away in 2020, 2021. It was during COVID. And the first thing that they asked me at Humber was, well, now that your mom's passed, are you going to be no longer involved with the PFAC? And I said, well, unless you're telling me I can't because I no longer have a relative that's being treated. I said, my take is I still can bring some value, both to the nephrology and to the corporate side. And then also with Toronto General, they're using me as a home hemo advocate. So if they've got people that are considering but they're not convinced yet, they will call me up and say, would you speak to so and so? They've got some questions on home dialysis. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? Should they, shouldn't they? So I'm basically turning the my experiences into what is hopefully a positive for, even if it affect, it impacts 2 or 3 people. That's 2 or 3 that would not have otherwise been impacted positively.
Do you think these support groups are beneficial to you as well? Do they help you?
Yeah, because it actually there's a level of validation because when people like when the I'll use an example that just happened recently. A gentleman was considering the home hemo, and all the questions that he was asking were all the questions that I first had. And so he says, like, oh my God, the fact that I'm even having these questions, it goes, maybe I shouldn't even consider it. And I started, not laughing, but I smiled at him and I said, well, if you didn't have these questions, you wouldn't be human. I said, because these are the same questions that I went through in trying to evaluate whether I should or I shouldn't consider home hemo. And I said, it's just natural for you to have these concerns or these questions. I said, now, fortunately, I can share with you some of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then at the end of the day, you have to decide as a patient whether you want to do it. But that there's a level of validation that happens even from my end when, first of all, that you hear the same questions, challenges that they have about going into treatment. But then when you're able to get them through it, there's like you're glad that you were able to help them through it. And by the way, helping them through it may not be that they're going to do home hemo. They may still decide it's not for me. I'm going to go in unit. So all you could do as a volunteer, as a PFAC member or a patient partner at Toronto General is give them the information. You give them the pros and cons according to you and to myself, that's according to myself. But ultimately, they got to make up their own decision because I don't know what their appetite for the diagnostic is for, when something goes bump in the night at 3 o'clock in the morning. So that's something that they have to decide. All I can do is share with them the information and then they can decide. But that is I think it's therapeutic for the volunteer as well.
So what advice would you give to a family member or caregiver that you might see like who might dismiss their family members or loved one's health struggle?
I would just say speak to others and others other than clinicians because that's that will be one of the primary sources of information. It's not that and I want to make sure that I'm not suggesting a patient or a family member uses a patient or family member, like say myself, as a clinician. That's not what I'm saying. They should use the patient family advisor or their peer, because it's a peer support group is what it comes down to. They should use them to understand the some of the challenges that their loved one is going through or that they're going through as a family member. And then when you start to hear that some of these things are part of the process and normal, it will then at least help you come to grips with, okay, this is not just mom being mom, this is mom on dialysis, which is, it could be mom, it could be anybody else on dialysis. It's an outcome of the treatment, which then gives you a better, I think it puts you in a proper frame of mind. And so if I could have done something differently back then, prior to me going through it, that would have been probably the best thing that I could have done.
And aside from a support group, do you find is there like any other hobby or maybe like sharing your experiences online that you think or having a good like loved one or friend But is there anything else that could help a person in this journey?
I'm sure going online, there's some benefit. Like this, for example, the forum, the a blog that Dr. Hertz is using is something very prescriptive and directed. The only apprehension I have about online is God knows what you find out there. So if somebody starts, doing, wild Google searching and you come up with, like, you can become jaded because now what do you believe? And so it's Dr. Hertz's platform that he's using. It's somebody who's specifically looking for, like, the whole content is, first of all, it's clinically based. Most of the people that are providing input are screen sanctioned by Dr. Hertz or that community. So it's not just Steve going on a wild blog and me putting out information that may or may not be true. So I'm okay with online stuff, but there's got to be some vetting process because otherwise you could just get yourself into trouble.
Is there another hobby or something that you could recommend for people to find some relief during this hard journey?
There are basically, if you go through whichever hospital you're associated with, whether it's Humber, whether it's Toronto General, like anybody who has the dialysis units and they're doing the dialysis, they all do have, or they should have, like a peer support group, a formal peer support group that they can speak with. Some of them will have online, Facebook pages that they can get to. So when I was going through the waiting for my transplant, there was a Facebook page on transplant donors and recipients. And I found that, it was just, that became refreshing in that you got to hear certain stories. But again, you got to be careful what you do with it because that's just a general blast of somebody's feelings and it may not be clinically based. But for me, it was more of where some of the anxieties of waiting for that day, and then also how do you go about asking for somebody potentially to be a donor without asking them to be a donor. So that kind of information you could get from those forums. So that would be my only suggestion is reach out through the hospital because at least they will be the ones to vet any type of user groups that you can join, and then you can help, share and validate information.
So could you share what it was like to go through a bilateral nephrectomy and what also is that?
A bilateral nephrectomy is where they remove both your kidneys. So in my case, the doctor basically told me, based on the size of my both kidneys, even if we had a transplant today, he goes, there was no space to put these kidneys in my body because my entire abdominal cavity was occupied by my old kidneys. So he says, we got to get them up. And they were also, they were acting as a liability. They were causing other problems where I would go through what they call the hemorrhagic cyst, where the cyst would just bleed out. And so he said they're not functioning, they're actually hurting you, and they're taking up all your space. So he said, like, why are we keeping them? So they scheduled this bilateral nephrectomy, and in actual fact, the nephrectomy was more intrusive than my transplant. It was a bit of well, not a bit, it was a huge challenge. I had gone through an excruciating amount of blood loss during the procedure, which then, because of the being, because you're on dialysis and to be a possible recipient in the future of an organ, the doctor explained to me that the more blood transfusions we give you, the greater the chance your body will reject future organs that you may get. So he said, my suggestion is we give you 1 unit of blood, like 1 transfusion, or they gave me 1 unit of blood, like 1 transfusion, and just to get you out of trouble. But then I have to organically build up, the blood on my own, which took forever. So tiredness, winded. When they removed my kidneys, I lost 45 pounds, like overnight. of that 25 pounds were kidneys. So they were very large masses that were in my body. Um, and then even, when I say I regained the blood, I regained it to what they would say is 110 units, my hemoglobin, which normally it should be 150, 160. So even though I had regained, I was still well below where I should be, but I couldn't get it any higher. And I didn't until I got my transplant, until I had a healthy kidney that could help me get back to where I should be. So it was actually, the nephrectomy was a lot more difficult than it, but at the same time, it also created a very easy in when they had the organ ready for them, because now it's just a matter of where can we put it, and there was all kinds of real estate available to drop a kidney in at that point.
When you got your transplant, how was your experience, the before, the during, and the after?
I mean, prior to it was an emotional roller coaster because I remember we were talking about it with my wife and my daughter about a possible transplant, but it was, for me, it was so I had been on dialysis for just shy of 2 years. So I said, guys, there's no way that I'm going to get a call um, over the next, I would say probably the next 18 months. Um, and I had 5 living donors that had come forward. So I was fortunate in that case, but each one of them, for one reason or another, got disqualified. They were not viable candidates. So when we were having this discussion, and I'll never forget it because it was November 22nd. October 22nd. It was a Sunday. And then at around 2:30, I get a call from Toronto General saying, this is the transplant unit. Would you be willing to be a secondary? What's a secondary? Well, there's a primary recipient. We have an organ that is allocated to a primary recipient, but if for whatever reason this doesn't work out, you would be the secondary. And I said, okay, does that change my place? And she goes, no, that's, if you get it, you get it. If you don't, then you stay in your allocation list of the wait list. So I said, okay, fine. Then within a half hour, I get a call back saying, okay, you're no longer the secondary, it's going to go to the primary. I said, thank you very much. Then a half hour later, they call back and they said, you're back on as secondary. And it's like, well, what happened? Well, we can't tell you for privacy reasons. So this is all happening like every half hour. So then I get another call a half hour later. So now we're at somewhere around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And they said, you're no longer secondary. And at that point, I was getting a little bit annoyed. I said, guys, this is an emotional swing. You got to stop doing this. I said, no, you don't understand. You're no longer the secondary because you are the primary. And when can you get here? How fast can you get here? And it's like, I'll be there right now. You go, no, just take your time, go home, be here by 6:30 p.m. We'll work you up. We'll do all the testing that we need to do. Surgery is 5 a.m. in the morning. So that whole 3-hour period, and then, right up until we got to the hospital was just like an emotional blur. Because you went from talking about a transplant that I thought was easily 2 years plus out still, to on, off, to it's yours, you're doing it, and now you're in a bed being tested and everything is going forward. And then, the surgery happens, the actual organ took over right away. So all of the clinical indicators were positive. It started working as designed, right from the first day, because they had warned me that there may be some partial dialysis needed while the kidney kicks in and starts doing what it's supposed to do. That never happened. The kidney took over right away. And then, post transplant, I mean, you're right now, I would say my life is almost as normal as it was before. There's some, you got to be careful with certain infection possibilities because you are carrying a foreign substance in your body, which is an organ. But other than that, I don't really feel there's anything hindering me from doing anything that I used to do before.
What's the importance of living donors for you?
So the importance of living donors, I mean, first of all, it simplifies the testing that goes on. with a living donor, if assuming you find a match, it gives you the best possibility of success. Now it's a difficult thing because most people find it difficult to ask somebody, oh, by the way, how you been? Would you consider giving me a kidney? Like it's not a simple ask. So my daughter helped me put together a Facebook page where we talked in general about, we talked about my situation, that I was, looking for an organ donor. I was on the list for a cadaver organ at some point, but we talked about just if anybody's interested in being an organ donor in general, not kidney, not, just an organ donor. And then we put in the links from UHN or from Toronto General that what do you need to do to be an organ donor? So it was more of a generic outreach as opposed to, hey guys, I'm in need of a kidney. Do you got a spare that you can that you can give me? So that went over, like I used that platform to try to at least educate people on the need for living donors. And as a minimum, I think, right now our system here in Ontario is that you have to opt in to being a donor. Like, so if somebody passes away through an accident, and you have to say, please take my organs and donate them. And I know out east, they have the reverse where you have to opt out. So you're automatically a donor. So if you get into an accident, your organs will go to someone unless you have opted out. Because I know a lot of people talk about, I want to be an organ donor. I just got to sign my papers. I got to register, and I'll do it tomorrow. And then I'll do it tomorrow and tomorrow. And then, life gets ahead of you and you never do it. So what I found was if somebody truly does not want to be an organ donor, they will opt out. But if they do want to be an organ donor, they will do it eventually if they get around to it. So I think if there's a way that we can reverse the existing process, that would be great here in Ontario.
How has your quality of life changed since receiving your transplant 2 years ago?
Pretty well normal. I mean, like I said, you got to be cautious about certain things, but I mean, I think all of us should be probably eating healthy in general. So I see zero limitations now. So that's let's just say it's normal.
So did you feel that your transplant gave you a second chance, and how has that shaped the way that you see the future?
Yeah, definitely a second chance. There's no question about it. The one thing that, and I try to share this with some of my friends, when you talk about, because we all get caught up in work, and you always say, well, like you're trying to get to the next level of work, and that's all good. We all do it, and we all should, but it's really we got to put more balance between work and personal life. If you spend all your time on personal life and not on work, that has its own ramifications. If you do the reverse, that'll have its ramifications where you're basically you're going to start hurting yourself in terms of, because you're not taking care of yourself. And we should adopt an approach where you live a little bit more today than tomorrow, because most of us will say, if I work hard today, then tomorrow I can take it easy, not realizing that tomorrow may have other challenges that may not allow you to enjoy tomorrow. So it's one of those things where you got to find the right balance, that you're not taking advantage of one side or the other.
If your mom were here today, what would you want to tell her?
I would tell her that I understand what she's going through, because she'd still be alive, still going through dialysis, and I'd be able to help her a lot more, being able to navigate the various symptoms and issues. And even though there may still be some of the ones that she would just complain about, but at least I would be able to say, okay, mom, that one, let's park that, but let's focus on this one. And again, it becomes a lot easier to be a true support for her, because now firsthand where you can focus to make her quality of life better.
How do you continue to honor your mom's journey through your own life and health experiences?
Primarily through what I'm doing in terms of the volunteer work, because it's if I can affect, a handful of people, and make their journey better, then that's basically, maybe I'm sort of replacing mom for somebody else and say, okay, what I could have done for her, I'm doing for somebody else. So that's really what it would come down to. So see if you could help others at least down this journey.
In your opinion, how can we better support patients with kidney disease who are going through dialysis or chronic illnesses in general so their voices are heard and validated?
I mean, the clear, I think the clear messaging has to be that open and clear communication with clinicians, yes. The peer support groups are mandatory because I find that you will get a lot more, not clinical information, but what I would call the emotional support from the peer support group. And it's not because you don't believe the doctors, but it's like you're speaking to somebody who is walking down the same path as you are. So they know what you're going through. The doctors know what you're going through because they see it. They've learned about it. They are experienced at it. So I don't want to minimize that, but it's a totally different comprehension speaking to somebody who is on that journey with you. And there's a level of belief. So, and then at the end of the day, like, if you going through that, and you need to always have some hope and empathy that your future will be better. Though the road might be a bit of a, wind at times, and it may have some, peaks and valleys. In the end, there is a positive outcome. And by the way, the positive outcome might just be that you live longer on dialysis, because, as bad as dialysis is, it beats the alternative.
Kidney disease is represented enough generally.
I think so. Like I know in between the Ontario Renal Society, like there are a lot of forums now. To be honest with you, I didn't really know about a lot of these forums until I started, not when I had total kidney failure, but as my disease progressed, and actually as moms did, then I would hear about these different societies. So I think it's there. Is it as widespread as cancer? No, but neither are the amount of patients like that. Because I mean, cancer is a very generic umbrella, whether it's, ovarian, whether it's lung, brain, like, I mean, take your pick. So there's definitely a lot more, I would say, support forums and information on cancer than there will be on kidney. But somebody who's down the path of a kidney ailment, usually there's enough information available through the clinical side that would say reach out to these groups, and they are pretty good in terms of trying to align you with some of the information.
So do you think that if you met a stranger like tomorrow and you told them that you had kidney disease, they'd know what it was?
They would say, oh, kidney disease, does that mean, like they'll say, what does that mean? Because I mean, kidney disease is, like I had PKD, but there are other kidney diseases. It's almost like if you say, oh, I had cancer, usually the first question, where was it? Like, what kind of cancer did you have? So I don't think they won't, they'll know that it's something that's not good, but they may not have the same implied information as they would with other, say with cancer. But it will be enough for them to say, what do you mean kidney disease? And then you'd have to sort of elaborate on in terms of, how far you want to go with your explanation. But they'll know enough to say, well, if I have a kidney and I have a disease, then that ain't good.
What message do you hope that others, so patients, families, doctors, take away from your story?
I would say the primary messages would be, one of hope and empathy. Like, you've got to be. We all have to be empathetic to what somebody's going through. And having dismissed some of the signs that my mom had, that will then create a level of guilt in the future once you realize that maybe you should have been a little bit more empathetic towards that. And that, there is a brighter future regardless of where you are in your kidney failure stages. I mean, I started off with just deterioration of kidneys, but then I got to the point where I was trying all types of clinical treatments, some trial meds, anything that I could do to try to prolong like to slow down the decay of the kidney disease. And so you have to sort of embrace and go down that journey, but realize that regardless of which phase you're in, there is, there is light at the end of the tunnel. It's just, we all look at it though, when you're going through it at first, it's like, oh my God, I just started dialysis. Like, what's the world coming to? Well, if I don't start dialysis, that might mean that I've already passed on. So the dialysis is not a bad option. It's just that you can't see it as you're in that step. Because when you go from one phase to the other, usually it's a deterioration phase and you see it as a negative. But in actual fact, it's like, well, if you don't do that, your negative will come a lot sooner and it may be lethal at that point. So there is a brighter future, no matter where you are in your kidney journey.